Hey there, my friends. Bloody Bill Box coming at you again. It's Dropkicks and Joysticks. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the video. If you're listening on Spotify, you're just hearing my beautiful, beautiful voice. But I'd like to thank you for tuning in for another episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. And I will admit, full transparency, when I first started recording these, I didn't know when I was going to record them. So episode 2 contains no thanks for the people that helped spread the word about episode 1. Dropped episode 1 on July 10th. In fact, I'll even go full transparency with you. I got a busy couple of weeks coming ahead, so I'm recording a little bit in advance. It's actually July 11th as I record this episode, 1 day removed from episode 1 dropping on YouTube and Spotify. Episode 2 is already in the can. In fact, it's already uploaded and set for premiere on July 17th. And when you're listening to this one, it will be July 24th. So you do all the mental math there about all the matrix I just probably broke. But I want to thank everybody that shared it out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, commented on YouTube. It's really cool to see anybody taking an interest in my attempt at a podcast. And as I said in episode 1, this is not my first attempt at a podcast. And that one, I didn't stick with it very long. But I think in this one, it's going to be a lot easier to stick with it because I have different expectations and viewpoints this time around than I did the first time that I did a podcast. This is really just about me sharing my love of professional wrestling video games and wrestling history with anybody that will want to take an interest in it with me. And whether it's one person, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, you keep increasing the numbers, whatever, it's irrelevant to me. I just heard Eddie Kingston, of all people, say this. I don't know why I said of all people, but I guess it was a source I wasn't expecting to hear this line from, but he was a guest on the What Happened When podcast with Tony Schiavone, and he said, that he absolutely would love to win championships and make big-time money and be in main event spots, but at the core of it all, he's in wrestling because he loves it. And when I do these types of projects, yeah, I'd love to make money off of them. I'd love to, maybe reach a larger audience and be able to generate things that help me and my family. But at the end of the day, I do these things out of a passion for talking, for performing, for storytelling, and just sharing my love of wrestling. It's, when I grew up, there was no such thing as being able to really share your love of wrestling without being made fun of perpetually. There were some friends that liked wrestling, but not everybody liked wrestling, and a lot of people would tell you that it was fake and that it was phony and it was stupid and it was just guys in their underwear rolling around covered in oil. You've heard all the insults. But now, and those insults still exist to this day, but there's a much larger segment of folk out there that enjoy professional wrestling, and that's what this podcast is all about. So I want to thank anybody that shared it, liked it, commented on it, listened to it. As of right now, I haven't gone and looked at any analytics for anything because, I'm a little nervous about it. I won't lie. But I do want to thank everybody one more time for offering your support to this because it's just fun for me and mildly therapeutic. Not to go mental health on everybody, but sometimes get a little down in the dumps, and doing something like this just kind of perks me up because it will remind me of good times and a good game, or it might remind me of a bad game and the bad times with that game, but I can smile about it looking back. But today's game feature is going to be I guess a combination of smiles and upset. But before I get into that, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes about other things that I do. You can catch me across social media, just about every site you could think of, at Bloody Bill Vox. There's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, Kick, YouTube, Teespring, Ko-fi, Spotify now. Good Lord. I have a little graphic. I should have pulled it up for myself so I can see exactly where I am. Let's run it down one more time. Twitch, YouTube, Kick, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. That was one I forgot. The PlayStation Network. If you like gaming, you can find me there. Teespring, Ko-fi, Spotify, and of course Threads, the new one from Meta, Facebook. Giving that one a shot as well, because whatever. In addition to that, July 24th is when this episode is dropping, so it's just 4 days away from the season finale of WWE 2K23 Fantasy Warfare, my weekly YouTube show taking legends and current stars in the video game WWE 2K23 and creating a fantasy scenario of matchups. It's been 2 seasons long, and this Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern, it's going to be a mega-sized megasode. And there is a detail that I'm trying to work out as of the recording of this episode that I can't officially drop. It may have already been announced by the time this episode drops, but it may not be announced until after. In fact, because of the way I'm talking about it, I may just hold off on making that announcement until after this episode drops. That's about it for the housekeeping stuff. Go over to YouTube, check it out over there. All sorts of fun stuff. Other gameplay videos too. We got full playthroughs of various SmackDown versus Raws, other WWE 2K content, old retro content. There's a bunch out there, and I'm adding stuff all the time. So check it out over there. It'll be a good time. But speaking of retro content and that sort of stuff, today's featured game is going to be WWF Royal Rumble. It was released on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. My experience is with the Super Nintendo, so that is the gameplay that will be up on the screen on YouTube. There was a Sega Genesis version as well. I own a copy of that too, but for the sake of sharing my experiences with the particular games, it was with the Super Nintendo edition. In fact, I didn't play the Sega Genesis version until many, many years later, and I was blown away at the fact that the two games shared many common wrestlers, but they also had some exclusives. Once again, as I've said, I'll be utilizing SmackDownHotel.com for many of the pieces of information, such as release date and that sort of stuff. Going to go ahead and just kind of remind you a little bit about the game itself before we start telling some stories. But the WWF Royal Rumble game was released on June 8th, 1993 for the Super Nintendo, and it was released on September 15th, 1993 for the Sega Genesis. That's interesting. I wonder why there was a delay in the release of consoles. Nowadays in gaming, when a game gets released, it's generally released on all platforms at the same time. Every once in a while, you'll see a console get an exclusive, and maybe that was the situation here. Maybe Nintendo had an advance on this title that Sega didn't have. I personally didn't get this game until 1994, January of 1994 to be precise. There's the story that I will tell around the game, a life story, involves getting that game for my birthday in 1994. But when the game came out, it was the follow-up to Super WrestleMania, which had been on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis as well. Super WrestleMania was a real step up from the previous WWF titles that had come out on the Nintendo, and it was exciting at the time to see wrestling games looking a little better than they looked on the Nintendo. We have the graphics that we have today, and we're blown away by those graphics today. But back in the day, who can deny that when these games came out, we weren't blown away by them? I still, even from the WWF Attitude episode, I remember talking about saying that for the time, the graphics were so mind-blowing and impressive. You just couldn't believe video games were progressing in that manner. But when WWF Royal Rumble came out, as noted here on SmackDown, Hotel.com, it featured a variety of match types, including the newly added Royal Rumble match. I would sure hope that a game called Royal Rumble at least contained a Royal Rumble match. The game's roster consisted of 17 overall wrestlers, and each game, and by each game they mean Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, had exclusive characters, which, like I said, I didn't realize that there were exclusive characters for each game until I came across a copy of the Sega Genesis version years later, because as a kid, I didn't have a Sega Genesis. I had friends who had a Sega Genesis. In fact, one of my closest friends, Ben, he had a Sega Genesis. He didn't have Royal Rumble. He had Super WrestleMania. In fact, my first exposure to Super WrestleMania was on my friend Ben's Sega Genesis, and that led me to going and renting Super WrestleMania on the Super Nintendo because that's the console that I had. But going back to the exclusive wrestlers, the Super Nintendo version exclusively had Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Tatanka. And on the Sega Genesis version, those guys are all swapped out for Hulk Hogan, IRS, Jim Duggan, the model Rick Martel, and Papa Shango. Personally, I think we got the better deal on the Super Nintendo. And a lot of people might argue about, like, yeah, what about Hulk Hogan? Sure, it would have been nice to have Hogan in there in the 93 game, but when you look at the roster that we got for those 5 on the Super Nintendo, let's play match them up. Flair and Hogan, obviously, you know, it depends on your wrestling style, which one you like, which one you'd prefer. I would prefer Ric Flair. Matching up, we're going down the line here, just matching them up in the order. Mr. Perfect or IRS, I'm going to take Mr. Perfect all day long. Ted DiBiase or Jim Duggan, I'm taking Ted DiBiase all day long. Yokozuna or the model, I'm taking Yoko all day long. Tatanka or Papa Shango, that's the one where I might have been a little bummed about Sega having some exclusive characters, because I liked Papa Shango quite a bit. I thought his character was silly hokey. I loved all the junk that he did with the Ultimate Warrior. You know, it was funny watching people bleed ooze out of their head and having their feet get set on fire and all that other jazz that was going on at the time with Papa Shango and the Ultimate Warrior. Short-lived character ultimately was Papa Shango, but amazingly still talked about to this day, and even Charles Wright, a.k.a. The Godfather, will still don the Papa Shango paint and stuff for various appearances, I guess, if the price is right. As I noted as I noted, each game had 7 characters that were on both versions, and those characters were Bret the Hitman Hart, Crush, the Macho Man Randy Savage, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, the Narcissist Lex Luger, and The Undertaker. So that's a pretty good roster for the time, and they were always pretty good about giving you, seemed like they give you anywhere from 8 to 12 choices in many of these games in the early days. And, you know, obviously you would have loved to have had everybody that was appearing on television appear in these games at the time, but, you know, these 16-bit cartridges probably only had so much room. I mean, if you consider the size of ROM files that you might find on the internet, if you're into nefarious activity, those files were never really that big. So, you know, it would stand to reason that these Super Nintendo cartridges didn't have a lot of memory. And I'm sure there's an answer to that question out there, but as you'll probably learn the more that you listen to this show, I'm not into the technicalities of all that stuff. I can't tell you how much memory a Super Nintendo cartridge holds versus a Sega Genesis cartridge versus a PlayStation 1 disc versus a PlayStation 5 disc. Yeah, these things I don't know. And that's okay. It's all right. You know, we don't have to know these things. You know, we don't have to know these things. We do not have to know them at all. So let's get into the little life story here of how we came to get Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo, because I often refer to it as a great consolation prize. And you might be saying, what do you mean by a great consolation prize? Leading into my birthday in 1994, I had never been able to order a WWF pay-per-view in my house. It was single-family household. Money was pretty tight. So, there wasn't always room to drop $30 or $40 on a pay-per-view. I don't remember what they were back in the day. I feel like they were $29.95 or $34.95 back in 1994. But anyway, I had asked a few times, but more often than not, I was watching pay-per-views at neighbors' houses in the area. Like I remember watching the 1993 Survivor Series in Boston with my friend that lived in the area named John. I was supposed to go to that event, but I had a particular parent who made a promise that he did not follow through on. Even if he had tried to follow through on it, he may not have been able to. He didn't even try, so that's where the angst came from. But that event sold out so fast that he may not have even been able to follow through on that. But bro didn't even try to buy tickets. But I digress. I remember watching SummerSlam 93 through my neighbor's windows because for some reason they wouldn't invite me in, even though they knew I loved wrestling and I got along with their kids and stuff, and they were inviting other people in, but not I. So I spied with my little eye the TV through the living room window, and hey, I was a wrestling fan through and through. I was going to consume these events any way I could. Funny thing is I told them about that later, and they were like, well, you could have come in. And I said, but you didn't invite me. A little tiny child saying, because I felt guilty afterwards about staring through the window. Because I wanted to see if Lex Luger was going to win the championship, to be honest with you. And so when it was all done, they were coming around, and I said, I watched the event from your window because I couldn't watch it at home, and I couldn't watch it anywhere. They said, oh, well, you could have come inside. And I said, oh, well, you invited other people. You didn't invite me in. Yeah, total moment. Instead of just asking, you know what I mean? But I kind of figured that since they weren't inviting me that I couldn't go in. But for the 1994 Royal Rumble, it's coming up on my birthday. And so I was going to take the opportunity to utilize my birthday as a means to get a pay-per-view ordered for me. So I said, Ma, for my 9th birthday, I would like to order the Royal Rumble on pay-per-view. I don't care if I get anything else for my birthday. I just want to be able to order that pay-per-view. Because we had Bret Hart and Owen Hart going for the tag belts. The Undertaker was going to be taking on Yokozuna in a casket match for the championship. We had the usual Rumble match. Yeah, there were some, other undercard matchups, but for the people I liked at that point in my life, they were both in major matchups. Bret Hart was challenging the tag team titles. The Undertaker was challenging the WWF Championship, and I wanted to be able to watch this thing live on pay-per-view. So we're approaching my birthday, and I don't remember exactly what happened. It was either a messy room. Maybe I stole some money to go to the arcade because I was known to steal a few quarters to go to the arcade and get caught for it. Either way, there was some infraction that went down where my mother decided, you're not getting the Royal Rumble for pay-per-view. You have lost that. You're not getting it because of blah, blah, blah. That part I don't remember. So I don't remember if it was justified. I don't remember if I felt she was going overboard. I just don't remember whatsoever. All I know is that when I was told that I couldn't order that event, I was devastated, man. Absolutely devastated because I had been looking forward to that for a while. Because, it's not like parents wait until the last minute to ask you what you want for your birthday. They find out immediately what you want for your birthday. And, so they have their time to figure it out and budget and finance and all that. So I had been looking forward to that happening. And then it got taken away. And again, memory serves that I did something to warrant it. My guess, more than likely, based on the time frame of life, because I thought maybe it was this previous issue I used to have that would turn out to be a medical issue. Wasn't that, because that would have been in like 92. So this in 94 had to have been related to messy room, because you know how kids are. I have kids now. I just recently had to basically go in like a bulldozer and clear floor space in one of my kids' rooms because it hadn't been getting done. So if I recall, it had to be a messy room. So, all right. My birthday is, to me, at that point, kind of ruined because I couldn't keep my room clean, or I couldn't not take $1.25 to go to the arcade that was half a block away. Whatever the case was, I remember that crushing feeling of defeat because now I wasn't going to be able to watch it. The only way I was going to be able to take that event in was if I found somebody to let me come over to their house. Except the problem was, whatever got the Royal Rumble taken away from me also got me grounded. So there was no leaving to watch the 1994 Royal Rumble. So right before the Royal Rumble itself, I believe, let me look up the date on that. I think the Royal Rumble in 1994 took place on, I want to say January 17th. I don't know why that date is standing out to me, but I'm going to look it up here while we are chatting. But either way, before the 1994 Royal Rumble, it was, okay, the 1994 Royal Rumble took place the day after my birthday. So my birthday party was the day before. Yeah, it would have been the day before because I know my mother would have taken advantage of the opportunity to actually have my birthday party on my birthday because, we'd have some family come over and all that stuff. And I don't remember anything else I got for that birthday. But I do remember getting the game that we're talking about here today, the game that you're watching if you're on YouTube, WWF Royal Rumble for the Super Nintendo. Now, typically speaking, I would have been through the roof to get a wrestling game because this was the first wrestling game I ever owned. It was the first time I'd gotten a wrestling game because I never had a Nintendo. I had just gotten the Super Nintendo for the previous Christmas, I'm pretty sure, so I think my game selection was maybe one or two deep. I think I had Super Mario World, maybe Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, maybe Madden 90. No, see, Madden would have been a couple of years later because I remember the first Madden I played was 96, so that must have been like a later Christmas. So maybe NBA Jam, maybe Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, but at the very bare minimum, all I had was Super Mario World because that's what came with the console. So, it's the first wrestling game I ever get. You'd think I would be thrilled and to the moon and over the moon, not even just to it, but over it, about getting a wrestling game for my first console. But I almost felt insulted by it. Because what event was I not going to be able to watch the next day? The 1994 Royal Rumble. But in its place, we're giving me WWF Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo. I tell you, at 9 years old, I don't know that I'd ever been more conflicted in my life. On the one hand, like I said, I'm happy. But on the other hand, are they ribbing me? Are they rubbing in that I can't watch it, but they'll let me play it? Which was not going to be the same because you granted, I could do The Undertaker versus Yokozuna, but I couldn't do it in a casket match. I couldn't do it for the championship. I sure as hell couldn't do Bret and Owen against the Quebecers because only Bret was in the game. And yes, I could do a Royal Rumble match, but as we noted, the roster on each cartridge is 12. 7 that are shared between the Super and Sega, and 5 exclusives on each. So I had 12 guys. But, having said that, I made the best of the situation on that particular day. And ultimately, Royal Rumble became a real staple of my gaming, which we'll talk about in a few, as we go into the experiences of the game. But I made the best of that day, because the party ended mid-afternoon, I'm back up in my room, and I it's funny how these images will just stand out to you. So the room that I had at the time, it was long and it was thin. So the room that I'm in right now, if I remember the measurement I did, it was like 100 and something inches across wall to wall. This room was probably about, I don't know, 8 feet, probably, I don't know, 8 wide, and then from my closet to the front window is probably about 10 feet. So, it had that kind of rectangle shape. And on the right side of the room, when I was facing my front windows, I had a couple of tiny square windows at the top of the room with the little crank window, the little crank to open it. I remember sitting down up in my room. I had a bean bag and all that jazz. My TV was up on my dresser. Oh, no, wait. It was on the cart because it lit up the cart a certain way, too, with the light I had on. Sometimes we get our visions misplaced. And I just sat down and I played. I played one-on-ones. I played tournaments. I played brawls. I played tag team matches. I played Royal Rumble matches. I played it for as long as I could. And I say for as long as I could because, well, maybe they weren't going to let me order the Royal Rumble on pay-per-view. But I'm sure many of you remember back in the day, before digital cable boxes, back when we just hooked our TVs right up to the wall, no cable box involved, that's how you got your cable. The pay-per-view channels were piped through that line as well, but you had to call the cable company and they would have to unlock it, yada, yada. But if you didn't have that opportunity to do so, those channels will remain scrambled. And a lot of people make the joke about the scrambled channel in terms of porn videos. And, well, of course, I checked out that side as well. You never know when you're going to see a clear boobie through all the pixelated scramble and otherwise green film-looking stuff. It was like trying to look for an Incredible Hulk boobie. But I digress on that side. When it came down to wrestling, though, could utilize that as almost like a radio show. So that's exactly what I did. If I wasn't going to be allowed to order the Royal Rumble, I was going to listen to it live as it happened. So I put it on the pay-per-view channel. I think at the time, I want to say, I'm just pulling a number out of my ass here, but I think my cable provider was either channel 61 or 62. I put it on whatever the channel was. It's, scramble like hell, but the audio, crystal freaking clear. And that was the workaround. So I sat in my room that night with a low light lamp on, very cozy feeling in the room. And yeah, I'm dejected. Yeah, I'm disappointed. But I got to listen to it. I got to hear Owen kick Brett's leg out of his leg. I got to hear The Undertaker's promo where he levitates to the top of the Providence Civic Center, and apparently it's actually Marty Jannetty. Or Tatanka, I can't remember what the rumor was. I got to listen to the entire thing. Was it the same as watching the event live? Shit, no. And I've watched the event plenty of times since then. It's a fine Royal Rumble. It's not the greatest of all time. But I ultimately got to do it all, despite the punishment, despite being grounded. And yeah, it wasn't watching it. It didn't beat watching it live, like I just said. But to me, it was a small moral victory over the authority figures in my life. Like I said, I probably, like I said, it's either messy room or stolen arcade coins, either way. I probably deserved the punishment, but I was bound and determined to take that event in. Couldn't leave the house. Couldn't order the pay-per-view. At the time in my brain, I'm like, I got this shitty game. It wasn't shitty, but my brain was calling it shitty. I started swearing at 7 years old. Good Lord. I got this shitty game, and I'm just going to make the best of it. Like, this is crap. So we're going to listen to it. So to me, it was a moral victory. Not as great of a moral victory as the one I had 2 years prior over that previous health issue that I mentioned that got me punished a whole bunch because we didn't know it was a health issue. But come to find out it was a health issue, and I knew it was a health issue, and I knew being punished for it was bullshit, but couldn't figure anything out, so I kept being punished. Man, oh man, oh man. At 7 years old, when that issue got resolved, you wouldn't think a 7-year-old would know to gloat internally about being right, but I did. I gloated so hard because I got punished, I got grounded, I had things taken away from me. But that's a whole different story for a whole different day. Let's not go into the dark side of Dropkicks and Joysticks. That's another season, folks. But so I come to get WWF Royal Rumble as a result of being punished, ironically enough, right? Like that's the story I just told. Is that I get punished, and that's my consolation prize. I will forever view WWF Royal Rumble as my consolation prize. You know? But once I had the game, and once the disappointment of missing out on the 94 Rumble wore off, I had so much fun with that game. It's super limited. You know, the Royal Rumble or the Super Nintendo controls are 4 buttons, directionals, and a couple of triggers, and the game utilizes most of them. Still quite simple on the controls to do various moves. Button mashing galore. So for me, I ended up doing a lot of the same stuff again and again and again as I tried to up my difficulty level, because you could start it down as low as 1, which would be super easy, and then you could work your way up to 10, which would be a murder. I don't think I ever really did that great beyond, like, I think 5, 6, or 7. I can't really recall. I just know that I was always trying to get better at the game. I was, one-on-ones, tag team matches, 6-man tags, those brawls, the tournaments. I love doing the tournaments specifically because of the little magazine advertisement at the end that you got. That little magazine page that says the brand new WWF champion. It was a fun thing that they used to utilize in all the games for that era. Super WrestleMania. No, Super WrestleMania didn't have a tournament mode, so it wouldn't have been there. But Royal Rumble had it. Monday Night Raw had it, and even Rage in the Cage had it, except it was actually on a graphic WWF magazine cover. That one was pretty cool. But I love doing the tournaments because it was akin to making the championships change hands. I think I played with virtually everybody. Obviously, The Undertaker and Bret Hart were probably my most frequent WWF champions. They were probably my most frequent winners of the Royal Rumble. Same thing with the Macho Man Randy Savage. I put in a lot of time to that game. That was in an era where I didn't really have a ton of friends that would come over. Like, I had friends in the neighborhood, so I don't really have a ton of memories of playing this game with people. Trying to think back, when did I start playing games with people? Because like Super WrestleMania, as I mentioned before, I played that at my friend Ben's house, but he wasn't really coming over to my house. My mother didn't like him randomly, so I tended not to bring him over because she'd always be like, I don't like that kid. He was a nice kid, and he's grown up to be a great human being, great father, husband. We don't keep in contact anymore, but if somebody were to say, hey, what are your thoughts on this guy, Ben? I'd put him over all day long. So I'm trying to think when maybe might have been Super WrestleMania, or not Super WrestleMania, WrestleMania, the arcade game for the Super Nintendo might have been when I started playing with friends on the consoles. Like I know my biggest memories of playing games with friends will come in the Nintendo 64, PS1, PS2 era. I'll definitely have some friend stories involved with some of those. But not a lot of memory playing this game with anybody other than myself. So not to be like wah wah on that one. But like WWF Attitude, we talked about me and my buddy David spending 23 hours taking Owen Hart to the WWF Championship. But here with the Royal Rumble game, it was really just me playing it. Because when I was younger with my wrestlers and my games, not to say that I had like this crazy great imagination, but I feel like I did. And a lot of kids did. This isn't even related to the game itself, but it kind of ties in a little bit. Like, I loved collecting the wrestlers, the Hasbro action figures as a kid. I also had a love for the Ghostbusters, so I had a lot of WWF merchandise and I had a lot of Ghostbusters merchandise. And in my room, the floor was a stadium. I'd set up that Hasbro ring and I would make banners. Like, I remember making a SummerSlam banner, taking a piece of notebook paper, drawing the SummerSlam logo the way that it appeared on TV, coloring it in orange, and then coloring the rest of the banner in blue, hanging it above the ring, and doing like a SummerSlam event. I used to do like my own circuits with the figures. The Ghostbusters merchandise, why would I mention that if they're not tied in? Well, they were. The Ghostbusters house was our big entranceway / locker room. The Ghostbusters car was the ring cart, would bring everybody to the ring. And of course, the Ghostbusters were involved in the ring. I distinctly remember Peter Venkman being the WWF champion. Wild times, my friend. But the point of all of that figure talk there is that with WWF Royal Rumble, for me, that unlocked a whole new world of creative options. Because when you've got your imagination rolling for you, the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit on that. And thanks to that game, I was able to granted, it was only 12 in the game, but because of it being a video game, I could do cards on the TV now. And then because I had the figures of the guys in the game, I could utilize the game for theme music. Because I've mentioned this before, and you'll probably hear me talk about it a whole bunch, time and time again. I love wrestling theme music. My first wrestling merchandise from my first show at the Boston Garden in 1992 was a fan club tape that had 5 or 6 theme songs, about a minute sample of each. I've always loved wrestling theme songs. I didn't have that tape come 1994, and Full Metal didn't come out until 1995, I believe. That's when we started getting our crystal clear theme song cuts. So in 1994, all I had was my Super Nintendo. So I would utilize the game to help fuel my Hasbro cards, and then I would also play my cards in the Royal Rumble game. I would do my own circuits with the Royal Rumble. This week it's Superstars of Wrestling. Today it's Wrestling Challenge. It was always the same arena, but in my imagination, it was Monday Night Raw, or it was Superstars of Wrestling, Wrestling Challenge, All-Star Wrestling. It was a pay-per-view other than the Royal Rumble. It just really fueled the imagination. And it was through the fueling of the imagination that I was able to determine the following. I've since recovered from this, but I've determined the following. I was not allowed to listen to The Undertaker's theme song by myself in my room at night in that game. I've told this story a whole bunch before. I might have even mentioned it in one of the first 2 episodes. I can't remember. I think I might have in the first episode when I talked about The Undertaker being my favorite, but in case you missed that story, I'll tell it real short here. When I was 5, I had a nightmare about The Undertaker that he followed me through a store. When I woke up in my bedroom in the dream, he rose up from the window. I woke up in reality, and it was on that day I decided I was an Undertaker fan for life. Playing this Undertaker track from the Royal Rumble game by myself in my room at night brought me back to the original fear that I used to have of the Undertaker. And as crazy as it may sound, I would start to become afraid of my closet. You think I might have gotten triggered by the window, but I was afraid of my closet. It got to the point where if I played that song at night stupidly, and sometimes I did it stupidly, I would just let it happen. I'd be like, why'd you do that? I either had to sleep with a light on that night, or I simply wouldn't sleep well because for some strange reason, I was once again afraid that the Undertaker was going to come into my house and essentially fuck my shit up. He never did. I met the guy in 2015. He's tall, he's intimidating, but he did not fuck my shit up. But that was the one drawback of the creative portion of playing Royal Rumble. In addition to, doing my own cards in the game. But when I would use the game as an aid for my figures, the Undertaker had to wrestle during the day. If I played with my figures at night and ran a card, quote unquote, the Undertaker could not be on the night card. He could only be on the day shows. I still look back at that and laugh because now I love every piece of the Undertaker's theme music history, including the original theme that the Royal Rumble track was based off of, Funeral March, which you can get across all streaming platforms in multiple forms, but notably you can get it on a Undertaker. There's an Undertaker album that they put out with a bunch of his themes. I always have a hard time saying compilation. I probably butchered it a little bit there. But anyway, I love all of his theme songs now. I love his entrance. I love everything about him. He influenced some of my movements when I was wrestling in the ring. But back in 1994, man, I was not a fan. Not a fan at all. So Royal Rumble, for its time, was an excellent, excellent game. For its time. Even still holds up a little bit to this day. I played Rage in the Cage recently, which is basically a beefed up Royal Rumble. And the simplicity just made me really happy. And the simplicity of Royal Rumble makes me really happy. Am I going to pick up Royal Rumble and play it on a daily basis like I might with WWE 2K23 or AEW Fight Forever? No. But when I do pick it up, I have a great time with it. And I laugh every single solitary time when I get to the Undertaker's theme song and I let those gongs play and the organs kick in. And I can take myself back to my room that I had in 1994. Because I remember I had a little basketball hoop in my room, one of those little Fisher-Price basketball hoops in front of my closet. I can remember where my TV was when I started being afraid of the Undertaker's theme song in the game or I said the dresser originally. By the time I started being afraid of the Undertaker's theme song, we had rearranged my room a little bit. My TV was up on top of my dresser. So I remember looking over at that closet over there with the little red, white, and blue Fisher-Price basketball hoop inside because I really loved basketball at the time also. And just wondering, is the Undertaker behind those curtains? What's he What's he doing over there? Is he over there? I'm scared. So if you like nostalgia, I always talk about, and I will always talk about, do I recommend playing this game so many years later? It came out June of 1993. So we just passed its, what did we just pass? 30-year anniversary of the game? Yeah, we just passed the 30-year anniversary of the game's release on the Super Nintendo. You can find copies of it around for about $15, it seems like. $10, $15. If you're a collector like I am, absolutely. Grab it, pop it in. It'll be good for an afternoon here and there. I think it was important in the history of WWF games because it introduced the Battle Royal, the Royal Rumble, into these video games. And with every title, things would expand. Raw was the follow-up. That had some expansion to it. WrestleMania, the arcade game after that, had a lot of expansion, including graphically. And then, after that, we entered into the PlayStation 1 era, where WrestleMania, the arcade game, did land. But, we got In Your House. We got WWF Attitude. We got Warzone. We had all sorts of continued improvements upon the graphics and the gameplay. But, I called WWF Attitude almost a trendsetter for its time because it introduced Create an Arena. The Create a Wrestler system was robust. It introduced a lot of things we hadn't seen before. And while we're talking about a 16-bit game, and we're talking about very limited function, the Royal Rumble function, and even the 6-man tag, which was present in Super WrestleMania, so we got to give that love there. But namely, the Royal Rumble feature being added into a game on a Super Nintendo console was just, again, trailblazing, trend-setting, because it showed that these games were going to continue evolving title over title. And you could argue that Super WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, Raw, and even Rage in the Cage on the Sega CD are essentially all the same game. I feel like each one takes steps over the other. Raw started to allow a little more flexibility with the brawls and that sort of stuff. It introduced the first time a female character had been in WWF games. Rage in the Cage introduced the steel cage match into these WWE games. So, if nothing else, Royal Rumble deserves its love for delivering exactly what it delivered on. And that's the introduction of the Royal Rumble match. For me, I'm always going to hold the game in a special place because of the story that I told here today of how I got the game, how it was basically a consolation prize for not being able to watch the 1994 Royal Rumble, but how I not only got that game, but I played it all day long. I was able to listen to the Royal Rumble, and then that Royal Rumble game became such a big part of my youth at that time, whether it was playing my own cards, practicing at it, or even using the theme songs from within that game in their 16-bit glory as the theme songs for some of my Hasbro action figures. So, that's my story on Royal Rumble. That's my experiences, my reviews, my life stories around it. I'd like to thank you for tuning in for another episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. We got new episodes dropping every Monday, 12 p.m. Video side is youtube.com/@BloodyBillVox. And on the Spotify side, it's some crazy long link, but you can just look for Dropkicks and Joysticks. Might be working on some other platforms in the future. One that I will not be working on adding to at this time is Apple. I've had one person say, let me know when it's on Apple, so I'd like to address that. I know security breaches can happen all over the internet, but Apple by far breached me the very worst about 3 years ago. They let 2 different fraudulent charges slip through, and they were for well over $900 each. So to a grand total of like $1,800. And I had flags on my account. I had a unique password, all this other jazz. I'm not sure what went wrong, where it went wrong, or how. But there's just a problem I've got with a business that breached me that severely at one point in time that requires me to keep a payment method on file just to have an Apple ID. I think that's kind of ridiculous that you're required to have a payment method on file just to have an ID with these guys. So at this point in time, I will not be bringing this show to Apple Podcasts. That might be a disappointment to some folks, but at this time, I'm not willing to move on that because, like I said, they breached me the worst. And if somebody else breached me harder, I probably wouldn't do business with them either. And I will open up the idea that maybe someday I might soften on it. I saw that they allow PayPal, but I have a credit card linked to my PayPal as well. Well, I usually have one, I should say. I swap them out quite a bit based on, credit limits and stuff. But I don't want the PayPal in there where the credit card is in the line. Plus, the other infos is in there too. We all know what goes into setting up a PayPal account, what they require. So do I want to give that info to Apple? Absolutely not. Do I want to even give my credit card info to Apple again after they breached this card once already? Absolutely not. So in the meantime, the only places you can listen to this show every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern is youtube.com/@BloodyBillVox for the video side, and Spotify. You can just search out Dropkicks and Joysticks. And of course, if I add any platforms, ones that utilize RSS feed or things of that sort, I'm still new to this whole podcast game, I'll let you know. And you can find out when I let you know by following me on social media at BloodyBillVox and all the places. And this time, I'm smart. I've got my graphic up. Here's the list of all the places you can find me at BloodyBillVox on social media. We got Twitch, we got YouTube, Kick, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, PlayStation, Ko-fi, Teespring, Spotify, and Threads. That's 12 different social media networks. Man, this shit is wild. All right, I'd like to thank everybody once again for joining for this episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. Episode 3 is in the books. We'll be back next Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern, over on YouTube for the video, over on Spotify for the audio. And until next week, I hope you all have a great week out there. Have fun, be safe, kick some ass if you gotta. And I'll do the same. We'll see you next week. Take care.